So hello and welcome to the channel and welcome to another Project Cars 2 video. In today's GT3 special we'll be taking a look at all the GT3 cars in this series and using their default setups, how they stack up at Bathurst. So most of you are probably aware that most of my channel is based on doing setups for numerous cars during time trial or community events and just trying to help everyone out really with how to go on with doing setups. Well, not everyone wants to do setups and a lot of people want to just get in a car and drive the circuit and spend as little time as possible in the setup menus as they can. So I thought I'd take a little look and see what cars would perform best using a fairly default setup. I have made a few minor changes but nothing drastic and I'll go over those before we get started, but this has certainly thrown a few spanners in the works as to regards to how some of the cars handle this circuit and how some of them really do perform. Now I'm not the master at Bathurst, but I've certainly turned a few laps around this circuit and feel that I could put in a competitive lap in each of these cars. So if you're open to try and better my laps, feel free. I'll leave the full list of my sector times and each car's performance at the end of the video, but we'll just go step by step. I'll give my views and opinions around each car and how it performs, and then we'll take a look at each lap to see how the cars handle the circuit and how they differ through their approaches to certain corners and how they suffer with issues with the standard tuning that's there. Just as another quick mention, I have also disabled traction control. So I'll start the video in reverse order, so we'll go from the slowest car to the fastest car, but first we'll take a look over some of the settings that I've changed, and I've tried to do, well, I have done, I've made this across the board in every one of these cars, just changing a few little tweaks which would no doubt be changed for any race. I have used a soft tyre, but for a race I certainly think it might be better off choosing a harder tyre, especially with the track temperature. But anyway, we go into the menu, I'll select the tyres and just change them to softs. I've gone to the tyre pressures and reduced them down as low as they go, which is usually to add better grip. Then I've moved across to the steering ratio because I'm using the McLaren GT3 wheel, and I've set these all to 9.5. I've put the fuel load to 50 litres and I've closed out the radiators, although it is a standard 5 litres that's in the tank before each run. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at the Mercedes SLS AMG. So during each run I made a number of notes whilst driving each car just to refer back to for doing the video, and this was a car that was just a real horror to drive, to be honest. I spent as long as I could spend in this car trying to get a lap together, which took quite a long time, to be honest. There's so many issues with this car and the way it's set up. I know it does perform good in some of the lobbies, and especially on the circuits like Monza, it's probably a beast of a car, but around this track it really does suffer from start to finish. Especially the gear ratio. Second gear is such a short gear, so as you drop down from third gear into second gear, you've got this fear of the car going into oversteer, locking the rear diff almost instantly. It feels really sluggish and unresponsive as you come down through the cork-through here, and it's just so unpredictable trying to find a balance with this car. It was a real nightmare just to try and string a lap together. I tried to hold out and hit a 206 in this car, but frankly it was just going to take so long to nail the perfect lap. I thought I would do better things with my time and move on to the next car, but a real handful to get this car to perform. So let's take a look at it as we drive around the circuit in car. So if this is your car of choice, you've got a real challenge on your hands here. Braking slightly later or earlier than usual for this corner, and just really holding out till you get into the rev range really to change down into second gear for that first corner. Changing up comes just after the green light, so you've got one little yellow light. That's probably about the best time to change gear. And again, just trying to hold out for ever dropping down into second gear. You're really just trying to wait as late as you can to pop it into second gear to stop that horrible locking at the rear, as you'll see just as we come through here, just really waiting to get into second gear before you're getting the power down. As we approach this section, as we come up into the park section of the circuit, just going up into fourth gear before we hit that bend, and then we're just going to stay in fourth gear around this whole section of the circuit, never really getting up to fifth gear, and just really struggling with loads of understeer as we come through here, really trying to throw the car in. And as we go over the skyline here, it's just going to be your hand in your heart in your mouth really as you come down through the dipper section, and the car is just so, there's just no certainty about how the car's going to perform. Down into Forest Elbow, again you're looking at whether the car's just going to understeer as we go down into second, and then just snap oversteer as you hit that gear down the Conrod straight. Just pushing the car up through the gears here. This is the easiest section of the circuit in this car, and on the other side of the circuit on Long Mountain Straight. Coming into the chase again, there's such a fear as you come into this corner as to whether you're going to drop down into second gear or even dares to go into second gear. I think I end up staying in third as we come around the corner and then popping it into second gear to finish the circuit out, and then finally just down to Murray's Corner, and again just waiting as late as you can to pop it into second gear, and then just getting back on the power. A real handful this circuit, and as you'll see we're still in the 207s, which is really a bit of a disgrace for this kind of car. That's the SLS. Let's move on to number 15, the Z4 BMW. As we're approaching Quarry Bend here, this was the only car out of all the GT3 series that struggles with this corner. Just trying to get the power down through this corner was an absolute nightmare. The rear end just steps out as soon as you get back on the power, and as again coming through the cut-in here, just trying to get back on the power there, it feels like an age before the engine picks up. It's such a high revving and long revving engine this, huge gear ratios. It doesn't really seem to do the car any justice. It seems to lack so much torque as we come up through the mountain section. This car loses over a second a lap just through sector 2 alone. It really does struggle through this section. It's an absolute mile away from the BMW M6, which we'll look at later in this series. But for me, this was probably the worst car in the GT3 series. It just feels like it lacks power completely. Didn't enjoy this car at all. So let's take a look in car. So as we start the lap, you'll notice that the gear ratios are fairly long, and we only managed to get into third before taking Hell Corner, dropping back down into second gear. Just trying to push the car as soon as you can really, without lighting up those rear tyres. You'll look on the dashboard, you'll see the 4 yellow lights, and as soon as we hit that first red light, that's probably about the best time to change gear. Approaching Quarry Bend, you'll see just how much I'm just waiting and just tinkering with the accelerator to get onto full power before allowing it to step out. Going through the cut-in as we come through here again, just feels like the car takes an age to get up to speed again. You're just trying to push the car and get it up, try and keep the revs up into second gear. Coming up over the parts section again, the car just really struggles, loads of understeer. You're just really trying to just throw the car into these corners. So as we approach the skyline, obviously we're going to be coming down through the gears, and you're going to spend most of the time down through this section in second gear, and really a low section of second gear. Just really seems to be, it just takes so long to build up the engine into a sort of power range that it starts to pull the car. It really does suffer with uptake, I think, and for me it's almost underpowered to be in the GT3 series as far as I'm concerned. So just finishing the last corner around Murray's Bend, and it just feels like an age to reach this finish line in second gear, pushing up into third gear. And that's the BMW. Only manages to still stay in the 207s and marginally better than the SLS. So moving on to number 14, the Aston Martin Vantage, a car that we'd all love to drive more often, but as soon as we get in the car, we just don't want to drive it anymore. It's a horrible sounding noise from this engine. It's like screaming toddlers banging plastic hammers against saucepans or something. That gear change is just annoying as hell. It's the only GT3 car that doesn't have any front downforce, so it just lacks front end grip from start to finish. Corner entry, mid corner, even through some of the high speed sections as you go over the mountain. This car is you're just fighting this car with understeer constantly. I'd say it's marginally better setup than the Mercedes SLS, but it's not really a car I enjoy driving at all. And still, it managed to get into the 206s, but that screaming engine and that clunky gearbox really does make this car suffer, really. And especially the missing downforce at the front end. I think if it added some downforce at the front end, this would be quite a contender. Let's have a look on the inside and get the car moving. So straight away you'll hear that clunky gearbox sound, absolutely horrible. Braking earlier than you would usually for this corner to try and get that car slowed down, stop that horrible understeer and get on the power to try and get the car to turn the corner, and then get powering down the straight, enjoying that clunky gearbox sound again. So we're going to wait for the red light on the dashboard as well before we're changing up into the next gear and braking a little bit earlier as per usual in most of the corners for this car, just to try and reduce that understeer and get on the power to turn the car rather than turning under braking. As we approach the cut in here, we're just going to be braking as we come through this corner to try and get the front end to grip, so it just pulls the car around a little bit more and understeers a little bit less. I would usually have popped the car up into fourth gear here just before we hit the corner, but there's just no grip at all, and you're really using the engine to get the car to turn. As you'll see through here, there's just literally no front grip at all, and the car, as expected, is just running wide, and you're just trying to use the engine to push the car around this corner. Coming down through the mountain section, the dipper section, it just doesn't feel planted. There's just that sense of not sure what it's going to do next as you come down through there, whether you're going to have grip or not. And as we approach Forest Elbow, you're obviously just going to be thinking, is the car going to understeer or not through this section? And you're just trying to get back on that power to push the car around the corner. So the last thing, we've got Conrad Straight to do, and as far as I'm concerned, the car's fine in a straight line. Seems to pick up quite nicely, but again, you're just having to brake that little bit earlier for these corners just to get the car slowed down, or else there's just too much understeer going on. Finally finishing the lap off, coming down through that horrible clunky gearbox for the final time. I guess we've still got to accelerate for the line. But yeah, we managed to get into the 206s. It's the only car that's in the 206s. It's a mid 206. It's probably doable in a lobby, but it's still nowhere near the top cars of the GT3 series. Let's move on. Moving on to number 13, the Porsche GT3 R and the 24-hour version. Both exactly the same cars in my opinion. Now, this was a real shame. I really do love the Porsche. I love the Porsche brand. I love the car itself, and when I first started playing Project Cars 2, this was my first go-to car, and I loved every minute of driving this car. But as soon as you're used to driving some of these cars, you do notice its flaws, and in the default setup there's just too much rear bias on the braking. It just makes the car slide too much, especially through the high-speed section of the circuit, up through the park section. The rear end's just sliding all over the place. Really hard to be consistent in this car. It's a real handful, I thought. As soon as I thought about driving the 24-hour version, I didn't waste too much time in that. I was glad to get out with the Porsche, to be honest. So let's have a look at it in car and see how it fares on the lap. So back in the Porsche, and it's nowhere near as clunky as the Aston Martin through the gearbox. Maybe that's to do with the engine note, I don't know. Either way, you can push this car right the way to the max. I generally look at this speedo on the right hand side of my screen for this one, and just change up as we get near that red line. Just obviously not pushing it right into the red line, or else we're just going to lose time as it bounces on the rev limiter. Now, watching the replay back, obviously the Ghost is slightly in front of me, and this car is probably capable of a slightly quicker time than I manage here, but it seems to look alright, to be honest. When I've watched the replay back, it almost looks like this car handles fairly well, but as you'll see as we progress through the GT3 cars, there's definitely an issue somewhere with this car. It just slides around a little bit too much for me, especially through this section. It feels like it's just gonna lose that rear end anytime soon. Obviously you don't see all the outtakes from previous laps that I've done to try and nail a good lap, but it really was a nightmare to drive this car, especially around Bathurst. Maybe it doesn't suit the circuit too well, but it still manages a 205, which is probably not a bad time for any online leaderboards. So I'll leave the rest of the lap to play out, and let you enjoy the rest of the lap. So there we have it as we cross the line, a 205.8, a comprehensive lap, but still at least a second away from where we want to be. Let's move on. So here we are, number 12, the Ginetta G55, and what a handful this car is. It almost sounds like a diesel for me as well for some reason. Just seems to be like a bit of a tractor noise coming along with this car. Slightly disappointing, although this car has fared well in a lot of the time trial events, and it just suffers hugely with locking through the rear, especially as we come down through second gear, and even on the uptake of the car as you come out, especially out of Forest Elbow here in the distance, just trying to get back on the power but just not wanting to let that rear end step out too much. An early gear change up through the gearbox seems to propel this car much faster, but its main issue is under heavy braking. Just watch out for that rear end snapping. Let's move on, let's have a look on the inside of the car and set a lap. So even as we start this lap, you'll notice there's a little bit of oversteer as we even get underway. Heading down towards the first corner, Hell Corner, it's the only car I think that I hold on to third gear through this corner. Just seems to do better than dropping down into second because there's so much rear locking. As I said, an early gear change propels this car much better. Just waiting for the green lights and then those two yellow lights before changing gear. So again, just watching the replay back, you can see the Ghost just a little bit further ahead, so there might be a little bit of a faster lap available. As I did mention, if you are interested, please do leave your times if you've tried using my setup or using the default setup. Obviously if you're going to change more than that, you're going to gain an advantage, but yeah, the car does feel fairly good, especially up through this section, but I think the general problem is when you're dropping down and coming down through the gears, especially towards Forest Elbow, it's just really tentative. But fifth gear seems to pull the car around nicely through here, and obviously you can see I'm pushing quite hard. Yeah, it's just coming down through the twisty section here, does get a little bit hairy through that little section there, just as to whether you're going to get a snap of oversteer, and again, it just feels so tentative as to whether you're going to get the oversteer or not. It just seems really inconsistent. But yeah, it manages 205, and it does pull quite nicely, definitely down the straights. So across the line and into the mid 205s for the Ginetta. Let's move on to number 11. So the Audi R8 LMS and the 24-hour version, both exactly the same car as far as I'm concerned, and both capable of a 205.5. This car really struggles to find pace through Sector 1, and it's hard to figure out why. The car feels planted and doesn't really suffer with any huge issues other than the fact that there's probably too much power ramp. There's a touch of understeer, and it's surprising to find it feels sluggish through some of the corners, and at times there's just a little bit too much oversteer under braking. Maybe a slightly more forward bias could help, or some adjustments with the preload and the coast ramp to stop the oversteer, and an increase in the power ramp to make acceleration a little more stable coming out of the corners. Let's move on and take a look at the in-car view. I've got to just add at the end there that this is an amazing sounding car, probably one of the best sounding cars in the game for me. Let's move on, let's get inside this car. So as we're approaching Hell Corner, just be careful on that downshift into second gear that you've got it down at least below a certain amount of revs before you're popping it into second gear. And again, it's a fairly early shift, just waiting for the first yellow light before shifting up along the gearbox. As we approach Quarry Bend, we're just going to hold on to fifth gear. Just saves popping it into second gear and sixth gear and another gear to come down. And again, as we come up here, just holding that third gear a little bit longer just carries out a little bit more power. Definitely plenty of torque coming from the engine as we come up through the park section, and popping it up into fourth gear nice and early as we come through there. Just going to hold on to fourth gear all the way through the park section here. Never seems to reach a point where I want to pop it into fifth, just until we come around this corner as we head towards the skyline. Feels fairly stable as we come down through the dip area, and I make a slight error under acceleration here, just popping at the wall, so there's probably a little bit more time in this car yet. So as we're approaching the chase, remember, don't be too eager to get down into that second gear. Wait until you get round the corner and stop that oversteer as we pop into second gear. Just trying to get all your braking done in a straight line and down into second gear before turning in and finishing the lap off. As we come into a 205 across the line, and it's a mid 205. A fairly comfortable lap. Moving on to number 10. So number 10, the RS01. And this was the first car that I felt I needed to adjust my force feedback on the wheel. Obviously there's a slight adjustment you can make to the caster angles, which will add a little bit more weight to the steering, or you can adjust the force feedback. But either way, this felt really light on the steering for me. Gear change comes just after the two yellow lights, so quite an early gear change to get that optimal change of gear and hitting the most amount of torque, or you could wait just for that first red light. Main issues with the car is a fair bit of corner entry understeer really. Just getting this car to stop feels like its biggest battle. The pickup feels pretty good, and Sector 2 feels fairly stable. The downside to this car is the understeer for me. It really struggles with turning response, definitely at slower speeds, although it feels pretty good through the fast mounting part section, but on the downhills it just feels the front end grip is really missing. It could be a lack of power on the corner exit, which isn't allowing the differential to work at its best. But yeah, corner entry understeer is a bit of an issue with this car, although it is probably one of my favourite cars in the game, and I've spent a lot of time in this car. And with setup adjustments, this is a pretty quick car. Let's get inside the car and do a lap. So you might find initially this is an extra gear change chucked in there somewhere. It's the only car that runs a 7-speed gearbox around this circuit for some reason in its default setup. And I think it would be better just using 6 gears, to be honest. So if there was the option to open out the gearbox and just use the 6 gears, I would do. So as we're up into the park section, definitely push this car into its 5th gear as you come around here. Like I did say, there is that extra gear in this car for some reason, and pushing up into 5th gear is definitely needed to come through there at top speed. As we come down through the dipper, you can see the car struggles and starts to get away from me a little bit there with understeer. Just doesn't seem to be planted through the slower sections. And again, as we're approaching the chase, just be reminded you've got that extra gear to come down through. Just feels like there's loads going on through the gear changes as we go through that section on the slowdown. And as we head towards the line, just getting ready to hit another 205, another mid 205. So it's breaking into the lower portion of the 205s and probably capable of slightly lower than that. But yeah, I enjoy driving the Renault, but let's move on to number 9. Well, here we have it, the Mercedes AMG, and what a surprise this was. It's not particularly a car I use very often, but one that features heavily in especially the AOR stuff, and even in real life the GT3 version really does bode well really on the circuit. But when it came to it, this car really took me by surprise. It was a real underperformer as far as I'm concerned. Definitely through the rear. Huge amounts of rear locking when it comes to braking, heavy braking. It really does struggle to slow the car down without that fear of the rear end just letting go constantly. I'm sure within a few tweaks of the setup you could probably dial this car in perfectly, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would be looking at this lap to say, you know, it's far beyond or it's capable of far better than I was able to get out of the car. But again, this is running almost a default setup. I'm sure with adjustment we could get this car hitting the 202s as per most of the cars will do under adjustment. But let's get into it, let's have a look at the lap and get inside the car. As we're approaching Hell Corner, just getting the car slowed down nicely in a straight line before trying to get the car turned in. Dropping down to 2nd gear and powering down Mountain Straight. We're going to be just trying to hit all the green lights on the dash before we change gear. As we come through the cut-in, you'll see it's slightly squirmy on the rear end, trying to get that power down and just not letting the car lose grip too much. I would like to have gone up into 4th gear, but 3rd gear carries better through up into the park section, and then just carrying 4th gear all the way around here, just trying to run the car as best as possible and keep the traction. This is probably the only tricky section really in this car on the downhill, Forest Corner or Forest Elbow. You just get that feeling that the rear end's just going to step out as soon as you hit second gear, and you tend to be a little bit more tentative than you need to be before getting back on the power. And again, as we're approaching the chase, it's that do or die going into second gear or not. But it does perform so much better on the uptake if you can get down into second gear. I did try carrying third gear, but I still think second gear carries better through that section. And again, through the last section here, Murray's Bend. And across the line, there we go. Still a nice low 205, and there's probably a 204 available. Anyway, on to number 8, the Lamborghini Huracan. Well, what can I say about this car? I thoroughly enjoyed driving it, to be honest. Probably one that matches my driving style more than many of the others that have come before it. Pretty well balanced car in my opinion. Easy to control on the corner exit. There's only just as we're coming through this section here, through into the cutting section, just as we come through there, I tended to just hold on to fourth gear a little bit longer than I would usually. Quickly shifting down to third gear just causes the rear end to lock up a little bit, and you end up sliding quite a bit. What else was wrong with this car? Suffers a tiny bit with lift off oversteer as you come down through the mountain section, which generally forces you to carry a little bit more speed than you would like to, really, just to keep the momentum of the car pushing forward. All in all, this was a really nice car. A little bit too much engine braking towards the rear, I think, or the brake balance. But other than that, thoroughly enjoyed it. Let's have a little look, see how it performs inside the car. So as we're powering up the hill, just coming towards the third corner, the cut-in, and just as you see, I just hold on to fourth gear a little bit there and then drop down. Just seems to balance the car a little bit better. Obviously, looking at the gear changes as well, we're just waiting to get probably like all the 5 or 6 green lights before we're changing gear. Very similar to the Audis. Starts to suffer with a little bit of understeer as we're coming through the dipper, and it's just carrying that little bit of extra momentum just to stop the rear end starting to lock up, really. Again, down through here, just carrying as much momentum as you can, really, to maintain that rear end grip. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the Lamborghini and probably capable of a 204 without a doubt. Let's move on to the next one. So on to number 7, the Bentley Continental 2016 model. I didn't actually spend any time in the 2015 because I thought both cars would be very similar. I'll certainly look at that at a later date, but this year's 12 Hours at Bathurst winner, the Bentley Continental, certainly took me by surprise. Initially, I thought this car was terrible, to be honest, but after spending probably about an hour in this car, just getting used to how it performs, getting used to the difference between the cars each time I get in and out of the other cars, This really did take me by surprise. Gradually you get more and more used to how the car performs, braking that slightly bit earlier than I was used to really, but as soon as you've got the car slowed down, the power through and out of the corners does pick up really quickly, really nice and nimble down through the dipper section, which I didn't think this car would be, but it really does handle the braking really nicely, especially down towards Forrester's Bend or Forrester's Elbow. It really is just really nice and stable, planted, and you can get on the power nice and early. Let's get in the car and let's take a drive. One thing I would just add, like most of these cars, they really do suffer going down into second gear, and this car isn't without that same issue. So if you are changing down into second gear, just make sure that the third gear revs are around the 5,500 revs mark before you're swapping down into second gear. But just holding on to third gear as you come up through into the park section just seemed a little bit better on the uptake as it was going through there rather than shifting up into fourth gear early. And just a little tap on the wall here was probably the only thing stopping this car getting into the 204s. This was probably the best car by far, handling Forrester's Elbow, just being able to get it car turned and on the power really quickly. So just as we come into the last bend, I'd probably just go into second gear a little bit too early there, just cause the rear end to snap a little bit before I'm able to get back on the power and across the line. And that could have been a 204 without a doubt. Let's move on to the next one. So in at number 6, the Nissan GT-R. And this car really didn't disappoint, it really didn't. This car sounds absolutely amazing, with that massive turbo just sucking away in your ear, with a real sense of power from the engine as the foreground feels like it's just being sucked through the bonnet vent. Definitely a tough car to handle though, with the amount of rear wheel traction that gets lost under acceleration, but if you can keep the wheel slip at bay, there's definitely a 204 available here, but it's not easy to master. Through the uphill section of the mountain, the rear end really does feel like it's just slipping, especially through second gear. And still, I thoroughly enjoyed this car, and it really does depend on your driving style. I was gutted not to hit the 204, but I did give myself a limit of 1 hour in each car, and this was so close to being into the 204s. Really enjoyed driving this car. You really have to get used to it, but it really is one to master because there's a huge amount of potential there, I think. Now let's get a sit inside the car and have a listen to that engine. And you can see what I mean instantly with through this corner. It really does feel like the car's just picking up speed super quickly. There's just a huge amount of power, especially through second gear, so really be gentle on that second gear, the initial application of it. Yeah, and another little tap on this wall which probably keeps it out of the 204s, but you can really see just how much I'm trying to push these cars to get the best out of them. So as you're coming out of Forrester's Elbow, it really is really tentative on the acceleration. It's so easy to overcook it on that corner and just get the rear end lighting up, and you're next, you know, you're in the barrier. And across the line then for a 205, literally a 204, and easily could be a 204. On to the top 5. At number 5, the Cadillac AT V.R. Something that really took me by surprise, this one did. It feels pretty well balanced, and one that I'll certainly be trying on a number of other circuits. What else can I say about this car? A touch of understeer on corner entry, with lots of power oversteer if you're a little bit too eager on the throttle application, but other than that, it's got quite a nice balance. Doesn't seem to handle the fast section of the mountain too well, but you need to persevere with this one. Trust me, it will pay dividends, I think. Just take your time with it, learn how it feels, and get used to how the car handles this circuit. So a really nice exit as we come off Hell Corner, nice acceleration, and it just picks up really nicely down the mountain straight. Just changing gear as we get that first red light, couple of greens, couple of yellows, and then the first red light. Probably holding on to it a little bit as we come through the next corner, just powering up this hill. Surprisingly, the car feels really nicely balanced as you come through here. Tiny bit of understeer, just stopping the car turning in there, and then nicely on the power without too much wheel slip. Changing up into 4th gear before we go here, a tiny little lift, and then power back on, and then using 4th, and then I think 5th as we come through this section. Just managing to carry 5th and keep it out of the wall, but just using all that track as much as you can really. Just heading towards the skyline. Just trying to get the car nice and straight into Forrester's Elbow. Sometimes gives you a little bit of understeer, but obviously then back on the power and down Conrad straight. Thankfully this car doesn't suffer too much with rear wheel locking as you go into 2nd gear, which is probably one of the reasons it's the first car into the 204s. So across the line then, I'm into the 204.9s. Starting to get somewhere now. Number 4, it's the McLaren 650S, and another car that took me by surprise, a car that I'd not even driven in the game yet, which was quite a surprise itself. I've seen a few people set some outstanding laps in this car, and I'm certainly certain I've seen a 203 around this circuit on YouTube in this car, which really did take me by surprise. Anyway, having spent a little bit of time in the car, it's quite a beast really. A little bit of understeer to be fair, but lots of power on the exit to get that car rotated. Loads of grip, and the stability but the understeer is the issue. Lots of input from the loud pedal, I think, to get this car to rotate, but a really fun drive, this one. Best changing gear just before the blue light on the dash, and just braking a tiny bit earlier than you would usually getting into the corners, but you're much quicker onto the accelerator to get it out of the corner. Yeah, let's have a look inside the car and get a lap underway. So braking nice and early for Hell Corner, and then getting back on the power almost before the middle of the corner, and then just powering down along this straight. As I mentioned, just before the blue light on the dash, we're changing into the next gear. Strangely enough, as we come into the cutting, I actually come right the way down into first gear. Whether it's possible to hold second gear, I'm not quite sure, but I do come down to first gear. Maybe it's because of the long gear ratios, or because it just feels better on the uptake. Yeah, really nice and agile as we come down through the dipper. Tiny rub of the wall, yeah, just puts the ghost in front. But I get a really nice exit off here, and as you see, as we just power down this straight, down the Conrod straight, you'll see that other McLaren just start to appear in that rear view mirror as we're powering down through these gears. So yes, across the line in a 204, and another car that I thoroughly enjoyed driving. Let's move on to number 3. So number 3, the Honda NSX, and probably another car I spent a lot of time in when I first got this game, and it really is a beautiful car. It's really well balanced, certainly one that you can enjoy and just throw around this circuit. It just seems to stick huge amounts of traction, and it's just a really nice car to drive. A real sense of attack with this car. Suffers a tiny bit with understeer on corner entry, which could probably be remedied with a little tweak of the brake bias. But all in all, it feels pretty good. It's definitely with the way I drive. This is really my sort of car. Super nimble through the dipper section of the mountain, but unfortunately it just seems to lack a little bit of speed down the Conrod straight, which puts the Sector 3 really the Achilles heel of this car. If it had a little bit more power, I think this would be the all-rounder, I think. Really nice car to handle, this one. Let's get in it. So as you can see, even through turn 1, the car does seem to push a little bit too much, a little bit of understeer, but maybe that could have been remedied with a little bit of earlier braking and then on the power. Obviously I'm looking towards the rev limiter on my right hand side for this one, just pushing every gear up to the maximum before changing gear. Little bit of rear traction lost as we're coming through this section, which probably loses us a little bit of time, but there's enough power in this car, but I think it's just the straight line top end speed that it suffers down that back straight, just to make that third sector just a little bit of a slow one. It'd have been nice to have hit a dead 38 in this car in the final sector. Just as we're coming under the Brembo banner there, this is the start of this sector 3, and this is the only sector it really struggles with, I think. If we could get maybe 3 or 4 tenths pulled on this section, this would be where the top of the leaderboard needs to be. Really enjoyed driving the NSX and thoroughly looking forward to getting back in it around this circuit. There we go, across the line with a 204 850 and onto the top 2. So onto the number 2 spot and the Ferrari. Probably quite surprising not to see this in the number 1 spot, but still it did do a perfect lap, and it was so easy to hit a 204 in this car. Just a few minutes into this session and I managed to get a 204, and surprisingly I hit bang on 204 818 2 laps back to back. So I left it at that with a really early, I think I was 20 minutes in this car before I hit a 204, so it's just really nicely balanced. Probably could do with a tiny bit more front end grip just to stop the small amount of understeer. Lots of low down torque makes this car really quick on the uptake. Nice very quick gear shifts through with this car. It's really nicely balanced under braking. Nothing more to say. It's typically one of the fastest cars in the game, and a real joy to drive. So here we go then, with Hell Corner out of the way, just blasting down this straight. And for a lot of the newcomers to the game, they're probably thinking I'm shifting gear far too quickly with this car and should be allowing it to reach its higher rev range. But there's so much low down torque in this car, it's far quicker to get the gear changed early and just allow the engine just to pull this car along. A really low gear shift for this one. As with most cars coming through this corner, just a tiny lift and then back on the power straight away. I've not really come across a car where you can just hold the throttle down full pelt through that corner, but if you can, you'll certainly pick up some good time. As you can see, coming down through the dipper there, it's just effortless. The car really does go exactly where you want to put it, and it just glides around the corners nice and early on the brake, and then just getting on the power nice and early coming out of the Forrester's elbow there, and then blasting away down Conrad Straight. Nice quick gear changes, guys. So an absolutely effortless drive up into the number 2 spot for the Ferrari, hitting a 204.8. On this occasion, the BMW M6 is the king of the mountain. An absolute beast of a car this is. It's got huge amounts of torque, just pulls it down the long straights, absolutely kills Sector 1 and Sector 3 and Sector 2 for that matter. It's agile, it's fast, it's powerful, it's just so easy to drive this car. Took me a little bit of time to get used to how it performs, but it really is a joy to drive, a real driver's car this. Very predictable car to drive with a tiny little snap of oversteer on corner entry, which can sometimes be a little bit emphasised if braking too late and trying to slow the car too quickly through the gears. Really enjoyed getting to grips with this car. Definitely requires a quick shift through the gears and a little bit of attention to the engine note during downshifts. Really agile through the downhill section of the mountain as well, down through the dipper, and fairly stable during that last tough left-hander, getting the car slowed down, but really getting on the power nice and early. Thoroughly enjoyed driving this car. Not particularly one that I would enjoy usually, but on the mountain this car just feels perfect. I'd love to see what this can do with a bit of a setup. So let's get in the car and have a drive round. So as you can see, as soon as you've got all those lights on the dash, get that gear change, don't wait for anything more, there's more power to come in the next gear. So just getting the car nice and straight on this exit before you unleash all that power and just allow that torque just to drag it up the hill. Really is so stable as it comes through. You can get on the power so early, which really does lend a hand to get down this Conrad straight with such speed. Managing to max out at 172 miles per hour like a number of other GT3 cars, but it really does hit that top speed so quickly, it just really does eat up set to 3. So there we have it, the king of the mountain, the BMW M6, managing a 204.452. It really is a spectacle itself, just how quickly this car could be, even in its default setup. So I'll leave a little image with all the lap times, all the sector times, so you can have a look over everything. And as always, thanks for watching. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do so. Hit the bell icon so that you're aware of any future videos being released. And thanks for watching. Thanks for staying till the end. Ciao for now.